Lisa Martinez rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the screen again. The numbers kept jumping around like crazy. She had been working the night shift at the Mars monitoring station for 3 months now, and she had never seen anything like this. "Jake," she called out to her captain. "You need to see this." Captain Jake Thompson walked over from his coffee machine. He was a big man with gray hair and old scars on his hands from his days as a Marine. He had been running this station for 5 years, watching the empty space between stars. Nothing ever happened out here. "What is it, Martinez?" he asked, looking at her screen. I'm picking up a signal. But it's not from Earth or any of our ships. It's coming from way out there." She pointed at the star map on her wall. Beyond our solar system, Jake felt his heart skip a beat. In all his years in space, they had never found proof of alien life. Sure, scientists talked about it all the time, but no one had ever heard from them. "Are you sure it's not just some old satellite or space junk?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "No, sir. This is different. It's organized. It's like someone is trying to talk to us, but the signal is really weak and broken up." Jake called over the rest of his team. There were only 6 people on the station, but they were all good at their jobs. "Everyone, drop what you're doing. You might have first contact here." The team worked for hours trying to clean up the signal. They used every trick they knew to make it clearer. Slowly, very slowly, they started to hear something that sounded like words. "It's some kind of language," said Tim Rogers, their computer expert. "But not like any language I know." "Can we translate it?" Jake asked. "Maybe give me a few more hours?" While Tim worked on the translation, Jake sent a message to Earth. He told them about the signal and asked for orders. The message would take several minutes to reach home and several more for a reply to come back. Lisa kept listening to the signal. Even though she could not understand the words, she could hear something in the voice that made her feel sad. It sounded scared. It sounded like someone asking for help. "I think they're in trouble," she told Jake. "What makes you say that?" "Just listen to how they sound. That's not a happy voice." Tim finally got the translation program working. The computer started turning the alien words into English. They heard made everyone in the room go silent. "Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help. We are the Zellery Collective.
Our worlds
are under attack. The Vorthok Empire is killing our people. They destroy everything they touch. We have sent this message to every star we can reach. Please, someone help us. We do not have much time." The message repeated over and over. Sometimes it was clearer, sometimes it broke up with static, but the meaning was always the same. Someone out there was asking for help. Jake looked at his team. They all had the same expression on their faces. They were scared, excited, and worried all at the same time. "Sir," Lisa said quietly, "what do we do?" Before Jake could answer, a new message came from Earth. It was from Admiral Kate Sullivan, the head of Deep Space Command. Jake had never spoken to her before, but he knew she was one of the most important people in the Earth's military. "Captain Thompson," the Admiral's voice said through the speakers, "we received your report about the alien signal. This is now classified at the highest level. Do not share this information with anyone outside your team. Continue monitoring the signal and send us all data immediately." Jake sent back everything they had. The translation, the recordings, and their analysis of where the signal was coming from. Then they waited. The alien message kept coming. Sometimes it changed a little bit. They heard different voices, all sounding scared and desperate. The Zellery talked about their beautiful worlds being burned. They talked about their people being killed or taken as slaves. They begged anyone who could hear them to come and help. "These Vorthoks sound really bad," Tim said. "The way the aliens describe them, they're like monsters." "How far away are they?" Jake asked. Lisa checked her calculations again. "About 200 light years. That's really far, but not impossible to reach with our new faster-than-light ships." 6 hours later, they got another message from Admiral Sullivan. This one was different. Her voice was calm, but determined. "Captain Thompson, you and your team have just made the most important discovery in human history. We are not alone in the universe, and our new neighbors need our help. I am authorizing the activation of the Terran Defense Fleet. Admiral Ryan Clark will command the mission aboard the UES Defiance. Your station will serve as the communications hub for this operation. Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. Earth was going to help the aliens. They were going to travel farther from home than any human had ever gone before. Prepare for fleet arrival in 72 hours, the Admiral continued. And Captain, good work. You may have just saved an entire species. Over the next 3 days, Jake watched as the biggest fleet of ships ever built by humans gathered near Mars. There were 50 warships, supply vessels, and support craft. At the center was the UES Defiance, a massive ship built for long-range missions. Admiral Clark came to the station to meet with Jake and his team. He was younger than Jake expected, maybe 40 years old, with sharp eyes and a confident way of talking. We're going into unknown space to help people we've never met fight an enemy we know nothing about, Clark said. But that's what humans. Do we help those who can't help themselves? As the fleet prepared to leave, Lisa was still listening to the alien signals. The messages were getting weaker. Sometimes hours would pass without hearing anything. I think they're losing, she told Admiral Clark. The signals are coming from fewer places now. The Admiral nodded. Then we better get there fast. Jake watched from the station's observation deck as the human fleet jumped to hyperspace. 50 ships disappeared in flashes of light, heading toward the unknown. They were carrying humanity's hopes and fears into the dark space between stars. As the lights faded, Jake realized that everything had changed forever. Humans were no longer alone in the universe, and now they were going to war. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zelari space. Admiral Ryan Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, looking at the screens that showed what lay ahead. What he saw made his stomach turn. Broken ships drifted between the planets like dead fish in a pond. Some were burning. Others had been torn apart, their pieces scattered across space. Among the wreckage, he could see smaller ships trying to escape, running from larger, darker vessels that chased them like wolves hunting deer. My God, whispered Lieutenant Commander Pete Rodriguez, the fleet's intelligence officer. It's a massacre. Clark watched as one of the enemy ships caught up to a fleeing vessel. The larger ship fired once, and the smaller one exploded in a ball of fire. There were no survivors. Those must be the Vorthok, Clark said. The people we came to help. The Vorthok ships were huge and black, covered in spikes and weapon ports. They looked like they were built for one purpose: to destroy things.
Ow.
The Zalari ships were different. They were smooth and graceful, with curves that reminded Clark of dolphins or birds. They were beautiful, but they were clearly not made for fighting. Admiral called out Commander Amy Foster, his first officer. We're receiving a signal from one of the damaged ships. It's in the same language as the distress call. Put it through the translator, Clark ordered. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in broken English. Unknown ships, please identify yourselves. You here too? Help us. Clark picked up the radio. This is Admiral Ryan Clark of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. We're here to help. There was a long pause. Then the voice came back, and it sounded like the person was crying. You came. You actually came. I am Kethril. Of the Zelari ship Harmony's Dream, we did not think anyone would answer our call. We're going to send a team over to your ship, Clark said. Are you able to receive visitors? Yes, please. We have wounded here, and our ship is badly damaged. Clark turned to Amy Foster. Take a medical team and go see what we're dealing with. Be careful. We don't know what these aliens look like, or if they're dangerous. Amy nodded. She was one of the best officers in the fleet, smart and calm under pressure. If anyone could handle first contact with aliens, it was her. 20 minutes later, Amy's shuttle docked with the damaged Zelari ship. She brought with her a doctor, 2 Marines, and a scientist. They all wore full spacesuits, not knowing if they could breathe the same air as the aliens. The airlock opened, and Amy got her first look at a real alien. Kethril was tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that looked like it was made of crystal. His face was long and narrow, with large eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. When he spoke, his voice made musical sounds that the translator turned into words. Welcome to our ship, Kethril said. I am sorry you must see us like this. We were once a proud people. Amy looked around the ship. The walls were covered in beautiful patterns that seemed to move and change in the light, but everything was damaged. There were holes in the hull, and she could see that many of the crew were hurt. "What happened here?" she asked. Kethral's glow dimmed. "The Vorthok came 3 days ago. They attacked our colony world without warning. We tried to evacuate as many people as we could, but their ships are so much faster than ours, so much stronger." Dr. Janet Walsh, the medical officer, was examining the wounded aliens. "Admiral," she said over the radio, "these people are hurt badly, but I think I can help them. Their biology is different from ours, but not completely alien." Meanwhile, back on the Defiance, Pete Rodriguez was studying the enemy ships through long-range sensors. What he found worried him. "Admiral," he reported, "these Vorthok vessels are built like nothing I've ever seen. They're not just warships, they're designed to terrorize. Look at this." He put an image on the main screen. It showed a Vorthok ship up close. It was covered in what looked like bones and skulls. Some were real, taken from defeated enemies. Others were carved into the hull like decorations. "They want people to be afraid of them," Pete said. "It's psychological warfare." On the Zalari ship, Amy was learning more about the enemy. Kethral showed her recordings of the attack on their world. The Vorthok were massive creatures, twice the size of humans, with thick skin and sharp teeth. They looked like dinosaurs that had learned to use weapons. "They do not just conquer," Kethral explained. "They enjoy causing pain. They take prisoners not as slaves, but as entertainment. They make them fight each other for sport." "How many species have they conquered?" Amy asked. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. They have been doing this for 1,000 years. Every species they meet either surrenders immediately or is destroyed within days." Amy felt anger building in her chest. "What about fighting back? Surely someone has tried to resist." Kethral's light flickered sadly. "We are not warriors. None of us are. We evolved on peaceful worlds where the biggest danger was bad weather. We learned to build and create and think, but we never learned to fight." Amy said, "You're about to learn from the best teachers in the galaxy." Back on the Defiance, Admiral Clark was making plans. He called together his senior officers. "For a meeting, what are we dealing with here?" he asked. Pete Rodriguez spoke first. "The Vorthok are classic bullies. They're used to picking on people who can't fight back. Their whole military strategy is based on fear and overwhelming force. They've never had to adapt to real resistance." Dr. Helen Torres, the fleet's scientist, had been studying the data from the Zellari ship. "Admiral, I think I know why the Vorthok have been so successful. Every species they've conquered came from what we would call garden worlds, planets where life was easy. They never had to evolve the instincts for survival that we developed on Earth." "What do you mean?" Clark asked. "Earth is what scientists call a death world. Everything on our planet is trying to kill us. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, even the weather. For millions of years, only the strongest and smartest humans survived. We evolved to be fighters." Clark nodded slowly. "So while these other species were learning to build beautiful cities and make art, we were learning to make weapons and fight. Wars, exactly. The Zalari are more advanced than us in many ways. Their technology is incredible, and they seem to be naturally peaceful and cooperative. But they never learned to be killers." Amy Foster's voice came over the radio from the Zellari. "Ship, Admiral. You need to hear this. Kethrel has been telling me about the Vorthok military structure. They're not just conquerors, they're hunters. They see war as a sport and other species as prey." "And what happens when prey learns to fight back?" Clark asked. "The hunters usually don't know what to do," Amy replied. "But Admiral, there's something else. The Vorthok have never encountered a species like us. According to Kethrel, every species they've met has been peaceful. They've never faced true predators." Clark looked around the room at his officers. These were people who had been trained for war since childhood. They came from a world where conflict was normal, where every human carried the genes of survivors. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, "I think we're about to give the Vorthok the biggest surprise of their lives." A new alarm started beeping. The sensor operator called out, "Admiral, we have incoming ships, 6 Vorthok vessels, approaching fast." Clark walked to the bridge window and looked out at the approaching enemy. They were smaller than his ships, but they moved with the confidence of predators who had never met real resistance. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Battle stations. Let's show these bullies what happens when they pick on the wrong species." As the human ships prepared for their first battle against an alien enemy, Admiral Clark thought about the message they were about to send. For 1,000 years, the Vorthok had terrorized the galaxy unopposed. Today, that was going to change. Today, they were going to meet humanity. Captain Steve Parker stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the 6 Vorthok ships approach. His vessel was smaller than Admiral Clark's flagship, but it was fast and heavily armed. Parker had been a fighter pilot before becoming a ship captain, and he understood one thing better than most. Sometimes the best defense was a good attack. Captain called out his weapons officer. "The Vorthok ships are spreading out in attack formation. They're moving to surround us." Parker smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Let them. They think they're hunting us, but they're about to learn who the real hunters are." On the UES Defiance, Admiral Clark was coordinating the fleet's response. He had faced enemy forces before, but never aliens. Still, bullies were bullies. No matter what planet they came from, all ships. "This is Admiral Clark," he said over the fleet radio. "Remember, these Vorthok have never faced real resistance. They're used to their enemies running away or surrendering. We're going to give them something they've never seen before." The lead Vorthok ship opened communications. The translator turned their growling language into English, but the tone was still clear, arrogant, and mocking. "Unknown vessels, you are in Vorthok space now. Surrender your ships and prepare to be boarded. Your species will make interesting slaves." Admiral Clark picked up the radio. "This is Admiral Ryan Clark of the Terran Defense Fleet. You will stop your attacks on the Zalari immediately and withdraw from this system." The Vorthok commander laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Terran. We have never heard of this species, no matter. You will learn to fear us as all others have." "I don't think so," Clark replied calmly. "See, we come from a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us. We learned to kill back." The Vorthok ships opened fire first, sending massive energy beams toward the human fleet. But Parker was ready. He had been studying their attack patterns during the conversation. "All power to engines," he ordered. "Attack pattern Delta. Let's show them how humans dance." The Retribution suddenly accelerated, not away from the enemy fire, but toward it. The Vorthok beams missed as Parker's ship dove under their formation like a shark attacking from below. His guns fired as he passed, raking the hull of the nearest enemy vessel. The Vorthok ship shuddered under the impact. Explosions bloomed along its side. The alien commander had never seen anything like this. In all their battles, prey species either ran away or stayed still while being destroyed.
Oh.
They never attacked back. "What are these creatures?" The Vorthok commander roared over the radio. On the damaged Zellary ship, Kethril and his crew watched the battle with amazement. Amy Foster stood beside them, and she could see the wonder in their crystal-like faces. "Your people fight like nothing we have ever seen," Kethril said. "They attack when they should retreat. They show no fear." Amy nodded. "That's because we're not afraid. We come from a world where everything wants to kill us. Other planets have gentle rains and peaceful animals. Earth has hurricanes that can destroy cities and predators that hunt in packs. We learn to fight back or die." Dr. Helen Torres joined them at the observation window. She had been studying both the human and Vorthok battle tactics. "Look at how the Vorthok fight," she pointed out. "They rely on intimidation and overwhelming. For us, their ships are big and scary, but they're not flexible. They expect their enemies to be afraid. And humans?" Kethril asked. "Humans are persistence hunters," Torres explained. "On Earth, we didn't always have the biggest teeth or the strongest muscles, but we never gave up. We would chase our prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We turned stubbornness into an art form." The battle continued around them. Captain Parker was leading 3 other human ships in a complex dance around the Vorthok formation. The aliens had firepower, but the humans had something more important: adaptability. "Enemy ship at bearing 270 is damaged," reported Lieutenant Lisa Chang from the weapons station. "Should we finish it off?" "Negative," Parker replied. disable it, and move on. I want them alive to tell their friends what happened here. Was psychological warfare at its finest. Parker understood that killing the Vorthok wouldn't end the threat, but humiliating them might make their empire think twice about future attacks. The Vorthok commander was getting desperate. His ships were taking damage, and these strange new aliens refused to behave like proper prey. They should have been running in terror by now. All ships concentrate fire on the largest enemy vessel, he ordered. We will crush their leader and break their spirit. 6 Vorthok ships turned their weapons toward the UES Defiance. Admiral Clark saw them coming and smiled. Signal Captain Parker, he ordered. Tell him it's time for Plan Charlie. Plan Charlie was something the humans had developed during their wars against each other. It was simple, brutal, and very effective against enemies who relied on formation fighting. Parker received the signal and grinned. All ships, execute Plan Charlie. Let's show them what chaos looks like. The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions, moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully coordinated. The Vorthok found themselves surrounded, with human ships attacking from every angle at once. This is impossible, the Vorthok commander screamed. How can they coordinate without formation? What he didn't understand was that human military doctrine was based on small unit tactics. Every captain was trained to think independently while working toward a common goal. The Vorthok, like many military species, relied on rigid command structures. When their formation broke, they didn't know how. To adapt, Commander Lisa Chang's ship, the UES Defiance, swooped in behind a damaged Vorthok vessel. Instead of destroying it, she used her ship's tractor beam to grab it and swing it into another enemy ship. Both Vorthok vessels collided and spun away, disabled but not destroyed. Impressive, Admiral Clark said over the radio, using their own ships as weapons. I like your style, Commander. The battle was turning into a rout. The Vorthok ships were designed to fight enemies who stood still and traded shots. They couldn't handle human hit-and-run tactics. One by one, they were disabled or forced to retreat. The Vorthok commander made one last desperate attempt. He activated his ship's ramming protocol, intending to crash into the UES Defiance and take the human flagship down with him. But Admiral Clark had fought in the Earth Wars. He had seen desperate enemies before. As the Vorthok ship charged toward him, he calmly gave an order that would become famous throughout the galaxy. Hard to port. Full power to weapons. Let's teach this lizard about close-quarters combat. The Defiance spun away from the ramming attack and fired its main guns at point-blank range. The Vorthok ship's armor, designed to intimidate rather than protect, crumpled under the impact. The alien vessel spiraled away, trailing atmosphere and debris. The remaining Vorthok ships retreated, broadcasting a message that would spread throughout their empire faster than light itself. Command, this is Battle Group 7, the shaken Vorthok commander reported. We have engaged an unknown species calling themselves humans. They do not fight like prey. Fight like us, but worse. They seem to enjoy it. Ship, Kethril watched the last Vorthok vessel disappear into hyperspace. He turned to Amy Foster with something like awe in his glowing eyes. Your people defeated them. The Vorthok have conquered 100 worlds, enslaved a dozen species, and you defeated them in their first battle. Amy shrugged. We're just getting started. You said they've been bullying peaceful species for 1,000 years. Well, they just made the mistake of picking on someone who fights back. Dr. Torres was already analyzing the battle data. Military doctrine is based on fear and overwhelming force, she reported to Admiral Clark. They've never had to develop real tactics because their enemies always surrendered quickly. And now? Clark asked. Now they're going to learn what happens when predators meet other predators. But Admiral, I'm worried about one thing. What's that? The Vorthok Empire is huge. When word of this defeat gets back to their homeworld, they're going to send everything they have. We just made enemies of the biggest military power in the galaxy. Admiral Clark looked out at the stars, thinking about the journey ahead. Earth had sent 50 ships to help the Zellery. Out there in the dark, thousands of Vorthok vessels were probably already being prepared for war, but Clark wasn't worried. He was excited. Let them come, he said quietly. They wanted to meet apex predators. Well, congratulations to them. They found us. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Vorthok Empire had tasted defeat. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council was called at 3 a.m, Washington time. President Maria Lopez sat at the head of the table, looking at the faces of world leaders on screens around the room. Everyone looked tired, but their eyes were bright with excitement and fear. Ladies and gentlemen, President Lopez began, 6 hours ago. Our fleet made first contact with hostile alien forces. Admiral Clark's report is now being distributed to your security teams. The British Prime Minister spoke first. Madam President, is it true that we won the first battle? Yes, but that's not the important part. The important part is what comes next. According to our new allies, the Vorthok Empire controls hundreds of star systems. When they learn about our victory, they're going to send everything they have against us. The Russian president leaned forward on his screen. How many ships are we talking about? General Carl Davis, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, answered. Conservative estimates put their fleet strength at over 10,000 vessels. We have 50 ships in the combat zone. The room went quiet. Those were terrible odds, even for humans. However, General Davis continued, we have advantages they don't know about. Admiral Clark's analysis shows that the Vorthok have never faced real military opposition. Their tactics are based on intimidation, not actual combat effectiveness. President Lopez stood up. I'm authorizing full military mobilization. Operation Righteous Fury begins immediately. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent people. The planet that had spent centuries learning to wage war on itself was now turning that knowledge toward a common enemy in the asteroid belt. Mining ships were retrofitted with weapons and armor. On Mars, the great shipyards that built civilian transports began producing warships. Even the moon colonies contributed, turning their industrial capacity toward making ammunition and supplies. But the most important changes were happening in the minds of humanity itself. Captain Joe Martinez received his orders while his ship was docked at Luna Station. He was a transport pilot, used to carrying cargo between the outer colonies. Now he was being given command of a converted freighter, armed with military weapons. Sir, his new first officer said, half my crew has never been in combat before. We're hauling supplies, not fighting battles. Martinez looked at the young officer and smiled. Son, every human alive carries the genes of people who survived on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. Combat isn't something you learn, it's something you remember. The officer wasn't convinced. But sir, these are aliens. They've been conquering civilizations for 1,000 years, and we've been fighting each other for 10,000 years, Martinez replied. Trust me, kid. When the shooting starts, you'll know what to do. Meanwhile, in the Vorthok Empire, news of the defeat was spreading panic through the military command. Emperor Vashkar, the destroyer, sat on his throne, listening to reports from his generals. He was ancient, even by Vorthok standards, and had personally conquered dozens of worlds. How many ships did these humans have? He demanded. 50, my Emperor? Maybe less. Vashkar's eyes blazed with anger. 50 ships defeated Battle Group 7, 6 of our finest vessels. The humans fight unlike any species we have encountered, the general explained nervously. They seem to have no fear. When we attack, they attack back. When we retreat, they pursue. It is ... unnatural. The Emperor stood from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. Send word to all sector commanders. I want 1,000 ships assembled for the next attack. These humans will learn to fear us, or they will die. Human space. The fleet was growing every day. Ships arrived from Earth, Mars, the outer colonies, and even the deep space mining stations. They weren't all military vessels. Many were converted civilian craft crewed by volunteers who had heard about the alien threat. Admiral Clark now commanded over 200 ships, but he knew it wasn't enough. The Vorthok would come in overwhelming numbers, just as they always had. Studying star charts of Vorthok territory, She was a special forces officer, trained in guerrilla warfare and unconventional tactics. Her mission was simple: find the Empire's weak points and exploit them. Vorthok controlled their empire through fear, she explained to her team. They keep conquered species in line by making examples of anyone who resists. But what happens if those species start fighting back? Major Tony Jackson, her second-in-command, looked at the intelligence reports. According to the Zellar, there are at least 20 species under Vorthok control. Most of them have been slaves for generations. Exactly. And slaves who have nothing left to lose can be very dangerous enemies. Brooks had a plan that was both simple and brilliant. Instead of fighting the Vorthok fleet directly, human special forces teams would infiltrate conquered worlds and teach the enslaved species how to rebel. We're not going to fight this warship, Chit, she told her officers. We're going to fight it world by world, teaching every oppressed species in the galaxy how to bite back. The first test of this strategy came at the Calith system, where the Vorthok kept a major supply depot. The world was inhabited by a species called the Morvani, who had been slaves for 300 years. They were small, furry creatures who looked harmless, but had been forced to work in dangerous mines. Brooks and 12 of her best soldiers infiltrated the planet using a captured DI, the Authok shuttle. They made contact with the Morvani resistance, a small group of rebels who had been fighting a hopeless battle for years. We want to help you, Brooks told their leader, a scarred Morvani named Kelrak, but we need you to help us too. Looked at the human soldiers with suspicion. You are not Vorthok, but you are still aliens. Why should we trust you? Brooks pulled out a small device and showed him recordings of the recent battle, because we're the species that just handed the Vorthok their first military defeat in 1,000 years. The Morvani rebels watched in amazement as human ships outfought and outmaneuvered the supposedly invincible Vorthok fleet. For the first time in centuries, they saw their oppressors lose. Teach us, Kelrak said simply. Over the next 2 weeks, Brooks and her team taught the Morvani everything they knew about guerrilla warfare. How to make bombs from industrial supplies, how to sabotage communications and supply lines, how to disappear into the civilian population after an attack. Most importantly, they taught them something the Morvani had forgotten: how to hope. The rebellion started small. A communications relay destroyed here, a supply convoy ambushed there, but word spread quickly through the slave networks that existed on every Vorthok world. The humans had come, and they were teaching people how to fight back. Similar operations began throughout the Empire. Human special forces teams, never more. Then a dozen soldiers would infiltrate occupied worlds and train local resistance movements. They didn't stay long. Their job was to light the fuse, not fight the whole war. Captain Martinez proved that civilian crews could fight just as well as military ones when his converted freighter encountered a Vorthok patrol. The enemy expected an easy target, but Martinez's crew fought like demons, eventually capturing the alien ship intact. How did you do it? Admiral Clark asked when Martinez reported back. Same way humans have always done it, sir. We were too stubborn to know when we were beaten. The psychological effect on the Vorthok was devastating. The first time in their history, they were facing an enemy that seemed to multiply instead of diminish under attack. Every human they killed was replaced by 2 volunteers. Every ship they destroyed was replaced by 3 converted civilian vessels. Worse, their own empire was beginning to crumble from within. Slave rebellions were breaking out on dozens of worlds. Supply lines were being cut by guerrilla attacks. Species that had been passive for centuries were suddenly learning to bite back. Emperor Ishkar received increasingly desperate reports from his commanders. My Emperor, the humans have only a few hundred ships, but somehow they are everywhere. At once, they appear behind our lines, train our slaves to rebel, then disappear before we can respond. How is this possible? Vashkar demanded. They do not fight like civilized beings, the general replied. They fight like wild animals. They use tricks and deception instead of honorable combat. They turn our own slaves against us. The Emperor's rage was terrible to behold. Assemble the great fleet. All ships, from all sectors. I will crush these humans and their rebellion once and for all. But even as Vashkar prepared his greatest weapon, news arrived that changed everything. A human strike team had infiltrated the Vorthok prison world of Nexus Prime and freed 10,000 political prisoners from a dozen different species. Among them were the leaders of resistance movements that the Vorthok thought they had destroyed years ago. The galaxy was beginning to wake up. For 1,000 years, the Vorthok had ruled through fear and superior firepower. They faced something they had never encountered before, an enemy that fought not just with weapons, but with ideas. The idea that tyranny could be defeated. The idea that freedom was worth dying for. The idea that even the smallest species could. The Battle of Titan's Edge would be remembered as the day the galaxy changed forever. 5,000 Vorthok ships dropped out of hyperspace near the outer edge of the solar system, their black holes blocking out the stars.
At their head was the
Emperor's flagship, the World Killer, a massive vessel that had destroyed more planets than any weapon in galactic history. Admiral Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, looking at the sensor readings. His fleet of 400 ships looked tiny compared to the approaching armada, but he wasn't worried. He was focused. Admiral called out his communications. "Officer, we're receiving a transmission from the Emperor himself. Put it through." The image that appeared on the main screen was terrifying. Emperor Vashkar the Destroyer was 8 feet tall, covered in scales and battle scars. His eyes burned with the fury of a creature that had conquered 1,000 worlds. "I am Vashkar, Emperor of the Vorthok, Destroyer of Worlds, Master of the Galaxy," the alien ruler growled. "You will surrender your pathetic fleet immediately, or I will turn your homeworld into glass." Clark looked back at the Emperor calmly. "I'm Admiral Ryan Clark, of the Terran Defense Fleet. I have a counteroffer. You will withdraw from all conquered territories and release every slave in your empire, or we will remove you from power permanently." Vashkar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You dare threaten me with 400 ships? I have conquered species with fleets 10 times your size." "Yeah, well," Clark replied, "you never fought humans before." The Emperor's expression changed from amusement to rage. "You think you're primitive? Species can stand against the might of the Vorthok Empire. I have been conquering worlds since before your species learned to use fire." "That's your problem," Clark said quietly. "You've been conquering peaceful species for so long, you forgot how to fight real warriors." The transmission cut off. Vashkar had heard enough. The battle began with the Vorthok doing what they always did, a massive frontal assault designed to overwhelm and terrorize their enemies. 5,000 ships charged forward in perfect formation, their weapons blazing. But the human fleet didn't respond the way the Emperor expected. Instead of meeting the charge head-on or running away, they scattered in all directions. Within minutes, the organized Vorthok formation was surrounded by hundreds of smaller human ships attacking from every angle. "What are they doing?" Vashkar demanded from his command throne. "This is not how space battles are fought." His tactical officer was studying the human movements with growing confusion. "Emperor, they seem to be using some kind of pack hunting strategy. Each group of ships works independently, but they're all coordinating toward the same goal." The truth was that humanity had learned warfare from 10,000 years of fighting each other. They understood something the Vorthok didn't. In real combat, there were no rules. There was only winning and losing. Captain Parker, now commanding a squadron of 20 ships, led his group in a daring attack on the Vorthok left flank. Instead of trading shots at long range, he ordered his ships to get in close, where the enemy's massive weapons couldn't track them effectively. "Remember?" he called out over the squadron radio. "We're not trying to destroy them all. We're trying to break their will to fight." This was psychological warfare at its finest. Every time a Vorthok ship was damaged or destroyed, it sent a message to the rest of their fleet. These humans could not be intimidated. Meanwhile, throughout the galaxy, the rebellions that human special forces had started were reaching their peak. On world after world, enslaved species were rising up against their Vorthok oppressors. The Empire's communication networks were filled with desperate calls for help from garrison commanders who found themselves outnumbered by their former slaves. Colonel Brooks, leading a mixed force of humans and alien rebels, captured the Vorthok Military Academy on Terminus 4. It was a huge symbolic victory that sent shockwaves through the Empire. This is Colonel Nina Brooks of the Terran Liberation Force. She broadcast on all Vorthok military frequencies. To all enslaved species hearing this message, your chains are broken. Fight back. We will help you.
Back.
At the main battle, Emperor Vashkar was growing desperate. His overwhelming numerical advantage was being negated by human tactics he couldn't understand or counter. Worse, reports were coming in from across his empire that rebellions were breaking out everywhere. All ships converge on the human flagship, he ordered. We will cut off the head of this rebellion. 1,000 Vorthok ships turned toward the U.S. Defiance, their weapons charging for a coordinated strike that would vaporize Admiral Clark and his command crew. But Clark had been expecting this. It was the same tactic bullies had used throughout history. When you can't win fairly, target the leader and hope everyone else gives up. Signal the fleet, he ordered. Execute Plan Omega. Plan Omega was humanity's final gambit, developed during the darkest days of the Earth Wars. If you couldn't save the leader, you made sure his sacrifice counted. Every human ship in the fleet suddenly accelerated toward the converging Vorthok forces. They weren't trying to escape or defend. They were attacking with suicidal fury, determined to take as many enemies with them as possible. But this wasn't a suicide mission. It was something much more dangerous. Humans. Fighting for something they believed in. The collision of the two fleets was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships, many of them converted civilian vessels, rammed Vorthok warships that were 10 times their size. Crews that should have been running for their lives instead broadcast defiant messages as their ships exploded. For the Zelari, shouted Captain Martinez as his converted freighter crashed into a Vorthok cruiser. For freedom, called out Commander Chang as her ship's reactor overloaded, taking 3 enemy vessels with it. Emperor Vashkar watched in growing horror as his supposedly invincible fleet was torn apart by creatures that refused to know when they were beaten. This wasn't how conquests were supposed to work. Prey species were supposed to surrender when they realized they couldn't win. Why won't they give up? He roared at his officers. None of them had an answer. In 1,000 years of conquest, they had never encountered a species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The battle reached its climax. When Vashkar himself entered the fight, the World Killer was the most powerful ship ever built, armed with weapons that could crack planets. He aimed it directly at the UES Defiance. Intending to end the human rebellion with one overwhelming strike, Admiral Clark saw the massive ship approaching and made a decision that would echo through history. Instead of running or trying to fight at long range, he ordered his ship to charge directly at the Emperor's flagship. Admiral, his first officer, said, "That's suicide. The World Killer outguns us 100 to 1. Clark smiled. Amy, have you ever heard the story of David and Goliath? No, sir. Remind me to tell you about it later. All power to engines. Let's show this ancient tyrant what happens when you pick on someone your own size." The 2 flagships closed the distance rapidly. The World Killer's massive weapons fired again and again, but Clark's ship was too small and fast to be an easy target. The Defiance wove between the energy beams like a fighter plane dodging anti-aircraft fire. When they were close enough to see each other's hulls, Clark fired everything he had. The concentrated firepower of the Defiance struck the World Killers command section just as the 2 ships passed each other. Both ships were damaged, but neither was destroyed. The real battle would be decided by something much older than technology, the will to fight. Emperor Vashkar, his ship crippled and his fleet scattered, made one final desperate gesture. Challenged Admiral Clark to single combat, warrior to warrior, as was the ancient Vorthok tradition. "Very well," Clark replied, "but we do this the human way." They met aboard a damaged space station that served as neutral ground. Vashkar was massive, covered in natural armor and armed with centuries of combat experience. Clark was smaller, older, and equipped only with a standard military sidearm. The fight should have been over quickly. Vashkar was a legendary warrior who had killed opponents with his bare hands. But Clark had something the Emperor didn't understand. the desperate cunning of a species that had survived by being smarter than their enemies. The battle was brief, but decisive. When it was over, Emperor Vashkar, the destroyer, lay dead, defeated not by superior strength or technology, but by the tactical thinking of a human who had grown up on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. News of the Emperor's death spread through the Vorthok fleet like wildfire, without their leader, and facing an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The remaining ships began to surrender or retreat. The Battle of Titan's Edge was over. Humanity had won. But Admiral Clark knew that winning the battle was only the beginning. Now came the harder task, building a better galaxy. Over the following months, the Vorthok Empire collapsed as subject species declared their independence. Some Vorthok worlds chose to surrender and ask for mercy. Others fought to the bitter end. But the age of conquest was over. In its place, humanity helped establish the Galactic Cooperative, a defensive alliance of free species dedicated to protecting each other from future threats. The rules were simple. No species would be enslaved, no world would be conquered, and anyone who broke these rules would face the combined Mai.